We're hearing a lot about the criminal justice system these days between news on reforming the system, reality TV shows like Lock Up, and even our seeming national obsession with true crime podcasts that my friend here is part of. And yet we still don't know how much women who are incarcerated within that system suffer and have to deal with. Women and girls are the fastest growing incarcerated population in the country, and today a House Judiciary Subcommittee will hold a hearing examining the unique stories of the women who are in the American criminal justice system.
Witnesses expected to testify at the hearing include Piper Kerman, she's author of Orange is the New Black, and Cindy Shank, who we featured on Rising last year, featured in the HBO documentary The Sentence. Joining us now to talk more about the hearing is Congresswoman Karen Bass of California. Congresswoman, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me on.
Congressman, just explain why it's important to take a look, particularly at the women and the young girls who are being affected in the criminal justice system. You're very right that it's a very under-discussed topic.
Right. Well, but you know what? I'm so excited that now finally in our country we are looking at the war on drugs, we're looking at mass incarceration and the consequences that that has had on our country. But typically when these conversations happen, the conversations are really only about men. They are not about women and they are not about children. And everything from how a woman gets involved in the criminal justice system, what her experience is when she's incarcerated, and what happens afterwards is very unique. And so this is the first hearing that we have that will be focused on women in the criminal justice system.
And you have a number of the actresses from the hit series Orange is the New Black who are going to be participating in the hearings. What do you hope that the American people learn from today?
Well, first of all, when the war on drugs really kicked up in the 80s with the crack cocaine crisis, there were specific laws that were passed that ultimately wound up targeting women, conspiracy laws that were used to actually capture the men who were the drug dealers, but the women wound up being incarcerated, sometimes even for longer than the men. And so looking at what happens, you know, when a woman is incarcerated, 85% of women are mothers, and they are primarily the sole caretakers for their children. So when a woman is incarcerated, the family can absolutely collapse. The child can be sent into foster care or can be sent to live with relatives. In some states, you know, if you're incarcerated for longer than a year, you could actually lose custody of your child. Federal law says that if your child is in foster care, if it's over 18 months, then we have to look at terminating parental rights. Well, what if you got a 3-year sentence for drug possession? You know, depending on the state you're in, you could have your parental rights terminated and your child put up for adoption. Can you imagine that? What about the fact that women get pregnant? Women sometimes go to prison while they're pregnant. Sometimes women get pregnant while they're incarcerated. Rape does exist in prison. Women should have access to gynecological care. They don't always have that access. Women who are pregnant until we passed federal law last year, during labor and delivery and throughout their pregnancy were shackled and chained when they were moved. Could you imagine a woman going into labor and delivery and being shackled and chained to her bed? There have been instances, fairly recent instances, where women complained of stomach pain and were put in solitary confinement and delivered their babies by themselves.
Wow.
That's horrifying. I think one of the interesting things that this at least has spawned this moment is a broader discussion about the criminal justice system. We have everything from the First Step Act, now we're talking about the Second Step, and I've even seen Van Jones and Pete Buttigieg call for a 50% cut in our prison population. Is that something that you would like to see?
Absolutely. I mean, it's really an embarrassment on our country that we have more people locked up in the United States than any place in the world. And if you look at the many people who are locked up, they're locked up because they're poor, because they can't afford bail or they can't afford proper legal defense. If you dealt with the poverty aspect, you could probably reduce the population by 50% with that alone. You know, why are people incarcerated just because they can't make bail? Shouldn't people be incarcerated because they're a flight risk? Like, look at all of the consideration that is being given to the sex trafficker Epstein. I mean, they're talking about confining him to his home because he can set up cameras and he can have his confinement to his house monitored. A person who can't afford a $5,000, $10,000 bail in many cities, in many states, can sit in jail for 12 months or longer awaiting trial. Why do we do that? We do that because people are poor. If we just dealt with that aspect alone, we could drastically reduce the prison and the jail population.
Why do you think some Republicans at this moment have come around on the idea of criminal justice reform?
Well, I would love to say they've come around because they realize the inhumanity, but I think what drives many of my Republican colleagues is the expense. This is a crazy way to spend money in our country, to spend public resources incarcerating people who don't need to be incarcerated. By the way, another aspect of women that is very, very different, it is a very, very small percentage of women that are violent. The majority of women are arrested and incarcerated for nonviolent offenses. Another thing that's different about a woman is because there are not that many facilities for women, women are typically housed very far away from their families. And one thing that's sad about women is that nobody visits women in prison. Women visit men in prison. Men don't visit women in prison. And so when a family, is taking care of the child, or the child is in foster care, then that mother goes without contact with her children sometimes for years. And this is something that just shouldn't be. We have so focused on punishment and not focused on rehabilitation, and that needs to change.
Congresswoman, while we have you, we'd also like to get your reaction. There was a major press conference yesterday by the squad within the Democratic Party responding to President Trump. Were you satisfied from that press conference, and how do you feel about the situation broadly?
Well, I'm not satisfied. I thought it was terrible that they even needed to do that. When will this president stop? Just when we think he's hit bottom, he finds 10 feet lower to go. And his assault, his racist, bigoted, stereotyped assault on the four women, I thought was just so, disgusting and despicable for the leader of our country to do that in such a old-fashioned, stereotyped way. And then what made me even sadder was the fact that my Republican colleagues could not even call that racism. They said, no, there was nothing racist about that. That was just pathetic. I thought that they did a good job yesterday. I felt bad that they even had to do that.
Have any of your Republican colleagues spoken to you offline about their feelings about the president's comments?
Not a word. And I do have to tell you that the number one thing I'm concerned about, though, I'm concerned about those women's lives. That's what I'm concerned about. I know them. I know that they deal with death threats to their person and their family on a daily basis. And for a president of any country, least of all our country, that would foment that type of hate that we absolutely know can lead to death. When that racist went into the synagogue and killed all those people in Pennsylvania, he cited the president. He said the reason why he shot up the synagogue was because money was going from the Jewish community to encourage the Central Americans to cross the border, and he cited President Trump. The fact that his words can incite violence, you would think, would cause him to manage his behavior. But I really think the reason why he did that, because he always does something bombastic when he wants to shift the agenda. And he made these wide claims about immigration that he didn't deliver on. He knew the Mueller testimony was coming up. So let's get everybody talking about something else. Let me launch a racist attack. He has systematically done this whenever he needed to shift the agenda.
Well, thank you so much for joining us, Congresswoman. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having me on.
Next on Rising, as ICE raids continue throughout the country, a group of organizations have come together to throw their support behind illegal immigrants.
Now there's a call to action for faith-based groups. The message, get involved. That when Rising continues.